Hello, this is the first of 5 videos that will cover my second CRISP lecture, which was called Spanish Conjugation with special reference to PYTA. And I'm dividing it into 5 because this is a 60-page handout. A lot of those pages are sample derivations or appendices, but I thought the video format would allow me to spread it out and show you more of it than I could reasonably press into a 3-hour session, which is what each of the CRISP lecture sessions were. So let me just make this large. All right, so let's get straight into it. This lecture is going to cover the first few sections, so that's going to reintroduce PYTA itself, sketch what the whole proposed solution is going to be, and then give you the details of the morphosyntactic part of that. And then all of the phonology from the main body of the talk is going to be in the second video. And then the remaining 3 videos are going to cover various of the appendices of the handout. And I'll break that down a bit more in a little while. But for now, here we are. The introduction is about 2 big questions dividing realizational theories of morphology. Here they are. The first is a big question about pieces. Is the input to the rules of exponents A, a syntactic or at least syntax-like hierarchical structure as on piece-based views, or B, an unstructured bag of features as on word-based views? And question 2 about paradigms. Are rules of exponents A, sensitive only to information in the structure they are exponing, or are they also B, potentially sensitive to the way other structures are realized via transderivational principles that regulate form correspondences? I didn't read this out loud, perhaps, but these are 2 big questions that divide realizational theories of morphology. So if you're in a non-realizational theory of morphology, like the version of morphology as syntax, the original version, as it were, the one practiced by Richard Kane and Chris Collins, then these questions don't arise. But they do for the rest of us. And on the face of it, process-based morphomes, in the sense that I introduced last time, would seem to weigh very heavily in favor of the B answers to these questions. This is certainly what Peter Matthews thought. He used the term Prissianic patterns for such cases after Priscian, who was I think 6th century grammarian who wrote a textbook on Latin, which made use of for pedagogical purposes, made use of process-based morphome type generalizations. More recently, of course, Aronoff 1994, whence the term morphome, and Martin Maiden and associates and students of his, such as Paul O'Neill and others. Who've argued precisely this, that these argue both for a more word-based and less morpheme-based view of morphology, and also for the need of paradigms internal to the grammar itself. And an especially dramatic example of this sort is provided by the PYTA morphome. What this handout here does is survey and extend the analysis in my recent Lingbuzz manuscript, which can be found there, which provides an account of Spanish verb conjugation in a piece-based, strictly generational and strictly modular theory, a version of distributed morphology. By strictly generational, I mean non-transderivational. So no comparison of outputs, no comparison across different derivations in resolving the results of one. This analysis that I'll present derives the exceptionlessness of PYTA from an interaction of independent generalizations that each extend beyond the claimed morphomic pattern. Right. So the punchline will be that once you've said what you need to say to account for each of these different patterns, and you must say something about each of them because they each extend in different ways beyond PYTA, there's no work left for a direct statement of the morphomic pattern to do. That's the idea. So here's where this is going. So we've got the introduction that I've just done. Section 2 is reintroducing PYTA in Spanish and a sketch of the solution. Section 3 is a primer on Spanish verb conjugation, just to give you a sense of what the overall system's like and how PYTA fits into it. And then section 4 is the details, part 1, syntactic structure and rules of exponents. And it's at the end of this section here, section 4, that this video will end. The second video will deal with the details, part 2, non-automatic vowel alternations. So this will introduce my assumptions about what phonology is and how it works, and the specifics of how those apply to the vowel alternation parts of the PYTA pattern, which we'll see shortly. And then the conclusion. So video number 2 of 5 will deal with sections 5 and 6. Then there'll be 3 further videos after that. One dealing with Appendix A, which is about heteroclite verbs. One dealing with Appendix B, which is about the preterito grave, which is a special group of verb roots which behave in special ways in some of the crucial tenses that play a role in the PYTA pattern. And then a final video will look over 2 short appendices on 1 verb each. So Appendix C is about ser, which is one of the B verbs. Appendix D is about ber, which is the verb to see, which raises special issues. And then I'll give you a little overview of just like the general content of Appendix E, which is the entire fragment so far, minus a few of the rules that are discussed but not formulated in the appendix on the preterito grave. Yeah, so that's where these are going to go. This video, I repeat, is just going to cover section 1, which you've already done, and then 2, 3, and 4. Okay, so let's reintroduce the puzzle then. In my 3, the Spanish PYTA morphome, the stem for the following paradigms can be derived by taking the third-person plural preterite form of a given verb and subtracting the sequence ron. The imperfect subjunctive in ra, the imperfect subjunctive in se, and the future subjunctive, which is obsolete in modern spoken Spanish. And in my 4, I've repeated that rogues gallery of irregular verbs, illustrating that no matter how irregular a Spanish verb is otherwise, this procedure will unerringly and correctly find you the stem that you need for the imperfect and future subjunctives. And this generalization, which is echoed in some form in some other Romance languages, is both exceptionless and diachronically persistent, as we discussed. And on the next pages, I provide the complete paradigms for 2 verbs illustrating this generalization, where the shaded cells correspond to the PYTA morphome. The verbs are the second conjugation verb querer, which exhibits what looks like root suppletion in the PYTA forms, and the regular-ish third conjugation verb pedir. Right, so let me just zoom out for you here. So here's the paradigm of the verb querer. Querer is one of those verbs that undergoes diphthongization when its root is stressed in most of the paradigm. So you see this here in the present indicative and present subjunctive. So you got quiero, quieres, quiere, queremos, queréis, quieren. So all of the forms here that have stress on the root have this diphthong in them, and the ones that have stress on the ending instead have no diphthong, and they have a monophthong e. Likewise down here in the subjunctive, quiera, quiera, present subjunctive, quiera, quieras, quiera, queramos, queráis, quieran. Now, what you'll notice is that in the preterite and in the 2 imperfect subjunctives and the future subjunctive, you get a special stem allomorph, which is bolded throughout this paradigm, and it's quis, right? So the preterite goes quise, quisiste, quiso, quisimos, quisisteis, quisieron. And then in the imperfect subjunctive type 1, you've got quisiera, quisieras, quisiera. Type 2, quisiese, quisieses, quisiese. Future subjunctive, quisiere, quisieres, quisiere. Now, something to notice here is that the bolded stem, quis, occurs throughout the preterite, not just in the blue shaded cells, right? So it occurs not only in the crucial third person plural preterite form, on which the process that feeds into the PYTA morphome is carried out, but also throughout that preterite, right? And other suppletive verbs pattern identically in this respect. So other verbs that in Spanish that look like they have some kind of root suppletion or at least stem suppletion have this same pattern where the crucial suppletive stem form is found not only in the third person plural preterite, but throughout the preterite. Right? Another thing to note here is that I've underlined a particular diphthongal variant of the theme vowel. So the theme vowel of the second conjugation is e. In various tenses, it seems to collapse with the third conjugation, and you instead get the vowel e, which is what you've got, for example, in the imperfect here. So it's quería rather than querea. But there are certain forms where you get a diphthong for the theme vowel, and those include the PYTA pattern, so the third person plural preterite, and all of these non-present subjunctive forms here. But they go beyond it. In particular, you also get a diphthongal realization of the theme vowel in the gerund. So the gerund is queriendo, right? And we know that the gerund isn't part of the PYTA pattern because if it were, it would have that suppletive stem allomorph. You'd have quisiendo, but that's not what you've got. You've got queriendo, so it's outside of the PYTA morpheme, but it still has that diphthongal variant of the theme vowel, right? That's important. Now, here is what I just characterized as a regular-ish third conjugation verb. In my six here, this is the verb pedir, which means roughly to request, to ask for something. And it's regular-ish because it has a vowel height alternation, which is not predictable per se, but it does form part of a larger pattern that's relatively common within the third conjugation. Outside of the third conjugation, you never see roots doing this. But you get e and alternating with e. So if I take the present indicative, I've got pido, pides, pide, pedimos, pedis, piden. If I go down to the present subjunctive here, you can see the same E in the stem throughout. So pida, pidas, pida, pidamos, pidais, pida, right? Now, when you look at the PYTA pattern, you see that you have that same high vowel in the root. So pidieron, pidiera, pidieras, etc., etc., etc. But crucially, again, it's not the case, as we've already seen, that high vowel variant is restricted to the PYTA pattern. It isn't, right? It's found also in the third person singular preterite, pidió, and through various other tense forms as well, as we've already seen, including the gerund, by the way, pidiendo, right? And once again, I've got this underlined diphthongal variant of the theme vowel, and that has the same distribution that it had in the previous paradigm, in the paradigm for querer. So it's in the PYTA cells, the blue shaded cells, but it's also in the gerund, right? Pidiendo. So here are, and those facts. So the internal vowel alternations internal to the stem, the theme vowel alternations, in particular the distribution of the diphthong version, and the distribution of the suppletive stem allomorph that we saw in querer. Each of those generalizations extends beyond paradigm in various different ways. So they each require a independent explanation, right? Here's what I will suggest for those. So the relevant rules of suppletive stem allomorphy, this is key ideas at the bottom of page 4, are sensitive to the environment minus present plus finite. So it's finite non-present tenses that are at issue here. The imperfect indicative, the future indicative, and the conditional would seem to fall under that characterization, but don't participate in the PYTA morpheme. But there'll be an explanation for that. But the crucial thing is that it's true that the things that the PYTA cells have in common, or rather the things that the suppletive cells have in common, are those features, right? And then the relevant vowel alternations are all non-automatic phonological alternations of the kind that I insisted last time that we must take seriously, as summarized on the next page. And I'll show you this in a minute. A couple of things to note about the notation here. You'll see a capital I. That refers to a vowel which undergoes alternations between E and E. And a capital U, which refers to a vowel which undergoes alternations between O and U. Okay. So here are the relevant generalizations. The underlying vowel, capital I, undergoes diphthongization when stressed and followed by specific combinations of segments. These will be specified later in my rules 48 and 49. 7b, the underlying vowel capital I surfaces as E when stressed in all environments not covered by the first statement, 7a. 7c, the underlying vowel capital I surfaces as E when post-tonic. So when it's after the stressed syllable, capital I surfaces as E. 7d, the underlying vowels capital I and capital U surface as minus high, i.e. as A and O, when they are unstressed, and the next vowel to the right is E. So that's a dissimilation type statement. 7e, the underlying vowels capital I and capital U surfaces plus high when they are unstressed elsewhere, right? Now, all of those statements, in terms of the primitives that are used to frame them, are purely phonological, right? So all of the generalizations there are phonological. And they account for the special vowel alternations that you saw just there that extend beyond the PYTA pattern and derive the crucial parts of the PYTA pattern as a special case. And in combination with the suppletive allomorphs, which extend, yes, again, in a different way beyond the PYTA pattern, they mop up all of the work that the PYTA morpheme does in a way that's ingrained into the rule system in such a way that you expect this to be diachronically persistent and you predict it to be exceptionless. Okay, so that's the sketch of the solution, okay? As a setup to the details of the solution, I'm now going to give you a quick primer on Spanish verb conjugation as a broader system. Right, so Spanish verbs have 13 tense aspect mood forms. The main conjugation classes, the main conjugation classes, the main inflectional classes of the system are illustrated here with respect to 3 of them. So we've got infinitives, the present indicative, and the imperfect indicative. And there are 3 conjugation classes, known as the first conjugation, which is the one that has the theme vowel a, so cantar. There's the second conjugation, which has the theme vowel e, as in comer, to eat. And there's the third conjugation, which has the theme vowel I, vivir, to live, right? As you can see here, the conjugations have in common that in the first person present singular indicative, the theme vowel is overwritten by the looks of things by O, so you get canto, como, vivo, no sign of the different theme vowels there. And then you also see that there are places in which the second and third conjugations look as if they're marked identically. So in particular, whereas the first conjugation goes canto, cantas, canta, cantamos, cantáis, cantan, and then cantaba, cantabas, cantaba, cantamos, cantabais, cantaban. In the second conjugation, you get como, comes, come, comemos, comes, comen. So you've got the air throughout this part of the present tense here. And then when you get into the imperfect, you get comía, comías, comía, comíamos, comíais, comían. Compare that to the third conjugation, where in all but the first plural and second plural in the present indicative, you get something that looks like the second conjugation theme vowel. Instead, you get an a, right? So vivo, vives, vive. And then when the stress is on the theme vowel, the E comes back. So vivimos, vivís, but then viven, right? And then in the imperfect, you get something that looks just like the second conjugation again, but this time it's the E that appears in both. So vivía, vivías, vivía, vivíamos, vivíais, vivían, right? Now, what I'll say about that in a minute is that the cases where it looks like the third conjugation theme vowel E is becoming E, looking like the second conjugation theme vowel, those are phonological, and they're produced by a rule which sets the height value of that underlying vowel to minus when it's after the stressed syllable. So the generalization about vives, vive, vivimos, vivis, viven is that just in the cases where the theme vowel of the third conjugation is after the stressed syllable, it surfaces as a mid-vowel rather than a high vowel, right? This merger that goes in the other way in the imperfect indicative, I'm going to claim is morphological in nature, morphosyntactic, really, right? Basically, what this is going to involve is a morphosyntactic merger. What would you call it? A neutralization. So it's a morphological neutralization of the two conjugation classes. And the reason for saying that is that there's no particular reason to expect to become E when stressed in this environment. There's certainly nothing in the surface phonotactics of Spanish that would lead you to think that that would happen. Like comea, for example, would be a perfectly good syllable here. So the fact that it's comia must have some other explanation. Some side note here. The second person plural forms in is, so cantáis, coméis, vivís, cantabais, comíais, vivíais, are standard in Peninsular Spanish but aren't found in all varieties. Most significantly, Latin American varieties lack them, replacing them with third person plural forms throughout. And you can see Arregui and Nevins 2018 and Collins and Ordóñez 2021 for two recent and very different perspectives on that. Now, turning to PYTA again, it holds trivially in the first conjugation. The first conjugation is by far the largest, and it's the only fully productive one. Now, the only verbs in the first conjugation that have any relevant suppletion in them at all are heteroclite, which is to say that they switch conjugation class in the crucial forms. And Appendix A deals with those kinds of verb. Non-automatic vowel quality alternations are unattested in first conjugation verb roots. Some of the first conjugation verbs do exhibit diphthongization alternations, but those don't interact with PYTA. Not the ones that are inside the root anyway. And the theme vowel in the first conjugation undergoes no relevant alternations at all. Yes, PYTA is true of the first conjugation, right? So here's the entire conjugation for cantar, to sing, in line 9, and you can see you take the third person plural preterite, which is cantaron. You subtract the ron, you get canta, right? And then that is indeed the stem that you have forming the relevant non-present subjunctives. But that's kind of trivial. Like canta is like part of most of these verb forms, right? And no interesting changes are happening for us to be surprised by. Now, relevant cases of stem suppletion are all concentrated in the second and third conjugations. Relevant non-automatic vowel alternations are concentrated, 1, internal to the stems of the third conjugation verbs, and 2, in the theme vowel of second and third conjugation verbs. As we'll see shortly, I'm going to be arguing that in the relevant tenses, the featural distinction between second and third conjugation is merged, that is obliterated, that is neutralized in favor of the third conjugation. Which means that really all of the relevant non-automatic vowel alternations are concentrated in third conjugation environments, because you find them in second conjugation verbs just in those tense forms where the distinction between second and third conjugations collapses in favor of the third. Now, on that collapse, see here, okay? So the yellow shaded cells are ones where the relevant endings are identical in the second conjugation verb comer and in the third conjugation verb vivir, whose paradigm appears on the next page, if I'm not mistaken. You can see you've got comía, comías, comía, comíamos, comíais, comían. Then in the preterite, comí, comiste, comió, comimos, comisteis, comieron. And the E there is that theme vowel. We've got the diphthongal variant of the theme vowel throughout the non-present subjunctives and in the gerund, as we've been used to. In the past participle, you get comido and not comedo. So that's another case where it's neutralized. And comedo, again, there's nothing phonotactically wrong with that. You get that same sequence in words like comedor, for example, which means like dining room or eater, I suppose. Now, for the present subjunctives, I'm actually going to take it following Harris 1969 that the "a" in the present subjunctive of these conjugations, as in like "coma" for eat, third person singular present subjunctive, and "viva" for third person singular present subjunctive of the verb to live, is not a manifestation of the theme vowel, but rather of what is labeled later in this handout as tense aspect mood, as tam, right? Harris 1987 gives an additional argument for this segmentation. What this means is that the "a" here isn't the theme vowel from the first conjugation, like coming in here. It's a separate piece. It corresponds to a separate piece. And one of the arguments that Harris 1987 gives for this is that there are varieties of Spanish in which the "a" of the subjunctive present of the second and third conjugations induces a different stress pattern than does the "a" of the present indicative of the first conjugation. So in such Spanishes, which don't include the standard varieties, you get stress on the root throughout, rather than on alternating between the ending and the roots, like you'd get in standard Spanishes. And that happens in these subjunctives, but crucially not in the present indicative of the first conjugation, right? So at least for those varieties, you certainly have to say that they're different markers. So what I'm going to say here following Harris is that in the second and third conjugations, which share a feature in common, those condition an allomorph of the present subjunctive tense aspect mood marker, which is "a", and it's an "a" that is floating on the timing tier. And theme vowels themselves, I'll propose later, are also floating on the timing tier. So they're not the floating are not linked to the timing tier, I should say, right? So they're not pre-linked to the timing tier. And that means that, for example, the underlying representation of the third person present subjunctive form of "to eat" is "com" followed by a floating "e" followed by a floating "a." And the underlying representation of the third person singular present subjunctive of the verb "vivir," to live, is "bib" followed by a floating "e" followed by a floating "a," right? And following Wetzel's 1995 on Portuguese, I take it that rules of floating segment association in Spanish proceed from right to left. And that means that if you've got two floating vowels next to each other, competing for one timing slot, the rightmost one is the one that will surface. So that will give you "coma" from underlying "com," floating "e," floating "a," and "viva" from underlying "bib," floating "e," floating "a." Okay, so that's so there's not actually going to be a rule that neutralizes the two conjugation classes in the present subjunctive. The features aren't going to change in the rather. You've got a single allomorph condition of the TAM marker for the present subjunctive, conditioned by the feature that the second and third conjugations share anyway. And the phonology of floating segments in Spanish guarantees that it's the present subjunctive marker that you see rather than the theme vowel, and that's why that part of the merge. Third conjugation for vivir here illustrates the same mergers. So you got vivia, vivias, vivia, vivi, viviste, vivio, viviera, vivieras, viviera, viviendo, vivido. And in all these cases, it's the usual "e" of the third conjugation theme vowel that you're seeing, right? Now, calling back to what I was talking about before we encountered those conjugation tables, I was talking about the fact that the relevant non-automatic vowel alternations that play a role in PYTA and a lot of other things in Spanish are all concentrated apparently in third conjugation environments. So all of the relevant vowel height alternations are concentrated in the third conjugation roots. And the crucial diphthongal theme vowel that you see is found in the second and third conjugation theme vowels, but just in those cases where there's neutralization, morphosyntactic neutralization of the features of those conjugation classes in favor of the third conjugation. So plausibly, the generalization is that all of these non-automatic alternations are concentrated in third conjugation environments. Now, recall that I'm aiming to preserve a strict version of modularity. So the fact that these non-automatic vowel quality alternations are concentrated in third conjugation forms in this way can't be encoded in the rules of alternations themselves. I'd have to be making reference to morphosyntactic environments in order to state that, and I can't do that given strict modularity. Nevertheless, I suspect that this fact is coded in speakers' minds somehow. That is, I suspect that speakers know about the rules of exponents of their language, that the only such rules that contain on the right side of the arrows an underlying representation that has one of these underspecified for height vowels that we'll see are all such that the left-hand side of the vowel of the rule refers to something in the third conjugation, something that's plus alpha in the feature system that we'll see later. And how might that be? That might redound to what's been referred to as the sublexicon idea in work by Maria Gruskova and her students and colleagues recently. I won't say any more about that now, but post a comment on the video if you're curious and would like me to expound further. Okay, so that's our primer on the conjugation system of Spanish. And we're now going to get on to the morphosyntactic details for what I have in mind for it. Much of which has been around for quite a while in the literature and is just being adapted by me. But that's where we're going next. All right, so I'll take it that amongst many other wonderful things that it does, that the morphosyntax of Spanish constructs a complex head that looks something like 12, okay? And this is taken more or less directly from work by Carlos Oregui with some emendations from the work of Iggy Roca. One thing I've abstracted away from here is the possibility that there's a theme node attached to the TAM head as well. You could perfectly well adapt what I'm saying here to include that idea, and I think it's probably right, actually, at some level. But that doesn't really bear on what we're talking about, and so I'm abstracting away from that possibility, and I've just got a single theme node here adjoined to the verbalizer. Some notes on notation. So the square root symbol means a root that has no inherent category, although it should have, it does have other morphosyntactic properties. It's just that verbiness or nouniness isn't one of them. I'm going to use big V to denote essence of verb, so the categorizer, and little v, not pictured here, but see the appendices for the external argument introducer. And then voice will be the head associated with active passive alternations, which clearly has to be separate from the external argument introducer in some languages and perhaps all. That head won't play any role at all in the discussion that we are having here. TH stands for the theme vowel node. You see I have it adjoined here to the verb verbalizer. TAM is for tense aspect mood head, and AGA is for agreement. In 13, I've got feature specifications for Spanish conjugation classes, which are just slightly adapted from Oregui 2000. So rather than having the third conjugation be minus beta, it's just plus alpha and nothing else. The second conjugation is plus alpha plus beta, and the first conjugation is minus alpha. These are, I take it, syntactic features that happen to have no rules of semantic interpretation that are sensitive to them. So they have no impact on the semantics at all. They have very minimal impact on anything else around them because they occur on a head which is adjoined to another one, and so they have little influence except in allomorphy. Nevertheless, they have to be in the syntax if you're being strictly modular about things. And if you want the full version of the argument for them having to be in the syntax, given the type of modularity I'm pursuing, you can see one of my other YouTube videos, which has the title, Romance Conjugation Class Features Could Be Syntactic, exclamation mark. In 14, I've got two rules that neutralize the distinction between the second and third conjugations. One of them deletes the feature plus beta in the environment minus present. And the other deletes the same feature in the environment plus present minus finite. And that characterization picks out at least the gerund and the adjective forming derivational suffix nte. And then in 15, we've got imperfect indicative impoverishment, which deletes the present tense feature, the minus present tense feature on the imperfect indicative. Now, Rule 15 captures the unusually regular morphology of the imperfect indicative. So there are exactly two verbs that have irregular imperfect indicative forms. Those are ser, one of the be verbs, and ir, and like arguably also ber. So three if you include ber, but two certainly. This impoverishment rule in 15, while it's obviously a stipulation, it's a motivated one because it captures that fact because the deleted feature is one that by hypothesis conditions a lot of irregular morphology in the language, and it's the one that's deleted on this tense. It also captures the fact that the imperfect indicative doesn't participate in the PYTA pattern, right? So that's crucial. Now, notice that Rule 15 deletes the minus present feature. Rule 14a deletes plus beta in the environment of minus present. That means that given that the imperfect indicative is one of these tenses where the second and third conjugation classes are in fact collapsed, that we want Rule 14a to apply crucially before Rule 15 in a counter-bleeding interaction, right? That counter-bleeding interaction, though, that counter-bleeding order doesn't have to be stipulated because it follows, in fact, from the cyclic principle. Because 14a targets the feature on the theme node, and 15 targets a feature on the tam node. And the theme node is lower in the structure than the tam node, right? Therefore, by the cyclic principle, 14a applies before 15, which is what you want. There's at least one other thing I wanted to mention here. Well, yeah, for 14, notice that 14a and b delete the same feature, but they can't be collapsed because impoverishment rules, like other rules, have to pick out natural classes. And you may wonder if that's a weakness of the account. I think the answer to that question is no, in particular because of Italian. So in Italian, you have a merger between the second and third conjugations in the gerund, in the present participle, meaning that you have an equivalent of Rule 14b. But you don't have a similar merger in the non-present tenses. Otherwise. So Italian, in other words, has an equivalent of Rule 14b, but no equivalent of Rule 14a. And that shows you can have one without the other, and that shows you that they are different neutralizations. Though interestingly, in Italian, the markedness relationships between the third and second conjugations have to be reversed vis-a-vis Spanish. So you have vendere going to vendendo, for to sell going to selling, with the air rate retained, but dormire, which is to sleep, has dormivo in the imperfect, so it's still got the e there, therefore no equivalent of the rule in 14a. But the gerund is dormendo rather than dormindo. So that suggests that the third conjugation is more highly specified than the second in Italian, which the reverse in Spanish. But in any case, shows you that these are distinct neutralizations in principle. In 16, I've got rules of excellence for the theme vowels. So the default rule in 16a inserts a floating a, an a that's not pre-linked to the timing tier. If you've got a theme node with plus alpha plus beta, that gets corresponds to a floating e. And if you've got a theme that's plus alpha, you get a floating capital I. So this is a vowel which is not linked to the timing tier, and which is minus back, minus round, and minus low, but underspecified for plus minus high. And that's the third conjugation theme vowel. Now, in an environment which is plus alpha and plus beta, Rule 16b will win because it's more specific than Rule 16c. So Parnell's principle guarantees that 16b will win then. If an environment has plus alpha, but it doesn't have plus beta, then Rule 16b will be overspecified, will not be able to apply, and then 16c will win, right? Now, so we've dealt with the fact that the imperfect indicative doesn't participate in the PYTA pattern using the impoverishment rule back in 15. How about the future indicative and conditional, right? So those are also non-present finite forms, and they don't participate in PYTA either. But that, I think, is explained by their internal structure, with respect to which I depart from Oreggi 2000 and instead largely follow Harris 1969, in particular pages 87 to 98. So the idea is going to be that the future indicative and conditional are built on the infinitive syntactically, which we know is true historically. They were those tenses arose from combinations of the infinitive and a form of the verb to have, right? Synchronically, I think this extra piece that these forms are being built with that combines with the infinitive is now separate from have, and I'm calling it the future conditional builder, or big V footcond, and it has this syntax. Okay, this is 17 is a piece. Okay, this is a piece. This is something that merge can apply to. It has V and future / conditional as its category features, class features plus alpha plus beta, so it's in the second conjugation. And it says, merge me with an infinitive and project me. So filled bullet X means merge me with X and project me, right? So it says, merge me with an infinitive and project me. And then it says, merge me with a theme vowel and project me. And then it says, clear bullet. Clear bullet X is a notation that I'm borrowing from Eric Siemens' work, which means merge me with X and project X. So you can use this for a junction. Here, there's a sort of mutual selection that's happening, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But basically what this is going to do, it's going to merge with the infinitive, project itself. It's going to merge with the theme vowel, project itself. And then when the tam morpheme selects it, it's going to place some conditions on what that tam morpheme can look like. So it has to be minus perfect and minus subjunctive. Without that, you would be unable to explain why it is that the only endings that you get are that combine with this are the present indicative, which is what gives you the future tense, and the imperfect indicative, which is what gives you the conditional. So I'm following ideas which ought to be cited somewhere around here, associated with, for example, Sabine Yatradu and others from the late 90s, early 2000s, that the future and conditional are associated with a similar type of modality. So this V footcon thing is going to have a certain type of modal meaning, which in combination with the present tense gives you what we call the future, and in combination with a past tense gives you something that's called the conditional. Now, that much is the same in Spanish as it is in French, as it is in Italian. But in Italian, interestingly, differently from Spanish and I think French, the past tense with which you form the conditional is not the imperfect indicative, but rather something that looks much more like the equivalent of the preterite, the passato remoto, right? And that has to be more for syntactic fact. So the fact that you use a past tense in combination with this modality is a semantic fact. That's what conditional is, right? Given Yatradu and others. But the fact that it's the imperfect past in Spanish and the preterite past in Italian is not going to follow from anything semantic and must be more for syntactic in nature. And it's this kind of specification where you're putting conditions on the thing that selects you that will allow you to get that point of difference in a system like this one. Not pictured in 17 is another type of instruction that sort of, again, most of these conventions come from Göri and Muller's work. The clear bullet is from Zeman in particular. There's also a notation that involves a clear box plus a feature, which means agree for the feature F, which makes no appearance in 17, but you can see it in Appendix E. That's going to account for, amongst other things, PHY agreement as standard. Also, the way in which the theme node gets its class features, it will agree for them with the nearest bundle of class features, which could be on the root, could be on a verbalizer, could be on something else. And that's what that says here. Implicit in all this, and as I said just before, I'm treating class features and theme vowels as part of syntax. There's some citations here, and I pointed you to my earlier YouTube video. So that will give you structures of this sort for the future tense forms for they will request, pedirán, and they will want, which is querrán. There's an extra wrinkle in the future and conditional forms of querer and a handful of other verbs, which is that they lose their theme vowel just in these forms. There's some discussion of that in the appendices, but because it's not relevant to the PYTA problem that we're interested in this video, I don't go into it any further here. Yeah, and here we've got so Bembridge 2022, which is an interesting DM thesis on Spanish conjugation, takes an impoverishment-based approach to these cases of athematic verbs in the future and conditional. Fabregas 2024 has an extremely interesting nanosyntactic account of the same patterns. But anyway, that's all that you need to understand the parts of this fragment for a grammar of Spanish verb conjugation that deal with the morphosyntax of the Spanish verb and the way in which the pieces that make it up are spelled out. As part of that broader fragment, you get the relevant suppletive aspects of the PYTA pattern as a special case. And the bottom line is that the PYTA cells of the paradigm have the features minus present plus fin in common, minus present plus finite. The imperfect indicative fails to pattern like the other tenses bearing these features because of the impoverishment rule in 15, which deletes minus present off that node. The future indicative and the conditional don't participate in PYTA because of their internal structure, right? And so here's the idea. The sample rules of exponents for the root of the verb querer in 19 suffice to derive the allomorphy on show back in 5. Now, here I'm treating this as root suppletion, right? So 19 goes, 19a, spell out want as quis, just in case the nearest tam node is minus present plus fin, right? And then you spell it out as quer otherwise. Couple of notes here on what these footnotes say. This footnote says that there's no avoiding stating this allomorphic dependency across the theme vowel in Spanish, right? Because you see the theme vowel independently. You get quisiste, quisieron, and so on. Contra some of the relevant DM literature, where particularly like in Italian past participles, and even Spanish past participles for that matter, the appearance of the theme vowel really consistently disrupts suppletive allomorphy, and athematicity correlates extremely well in past participles with the possibility of root suppletion. And that has justly been trumpeted by, for example, Dave Embeck and Andrea Calabrese as a feather in the cap of approaches that say that suppletive allomorphy has to be conditioned via linear adjacency. But I can't see a way around a weakening of that position. Once you get onto these particular patterns in Spanish, this really does seem to be conditioned across the theme vowel. I mention here, it says see Appendix B and/or Appendix E for a more complete analysis of the PYTA forms of this and similar verbs involving slightly different assumptions about what's undergoing suppletion. So what I say there is that it's not the root that's suppletive here. Instead, it's the verbalizer, which can be realized as a floating bundle of vocalic features that raises the internal vowel, right? If that's the right analysis, then it will still be true that a linear adjacency-based account of allomorphy is too strong here because, the verbalizer will still be separated from the tam morpheme by theme vowel. However, given that the theme vowel is adjoined to the verbalizer, there's a chance that you can make what's called a structural adjacency account run. So the idea would be that the actual suppletion is on the verbalizer. The TAM node merges, or at least configurationally is right next to the verbalizer at the relevant stage of the derivation, and that's enough. But it does seem to me that you have to weaken any approach that takes strict linear adjacency to be the relevant factor here. There are some more relevant references here. So Bembridge 2022 notes this same problem for linear adjacency in his dissertation with respect to these Spanish facts. On the more general issue, see also Moscal and Smith 2016 and Masha Bezvin's Masha Bezvin's recent Nels Proceedings paper. Yes. And one other thing, this superscript CV here indicates that within that underlying representation, you've got some extra timing slots that are unfilled. The presence of those empty timing slots will result in diphthongization when the root is stressed, following a recent updating of an idea in a paper by James Harris from 1985, which appears in the master's thesis from UCAM by Perez Herrera, which I'll discuss in the next video. But that concludes this one. We've reminded ourselves of what PYTA is. We've seen a sketch of what my solution to it in terms of a strictly generational, piece-based, strictly modular theory is going to be. And we've seen the details of the morphosyntactic side of that account, including like the crucial impoverishment rules that give you morphological neutralization of the second and third conjugations in critical cases, and a sample sort of rule, a pair of rules of exponents showing how the relevant suppletive allomorphy that plays a role in PYTA, but extends beyond PYTA, crucially, is to be explained. In the next video, we're going to dig into the phonology, and a lot of phonology it will be. So I'll see you for that one.